Hey, this is Major General Retired Rita Broadway. For those of you that were not on yesterday, or who I have not had the opportunity to meet in person, I'm the president of SARCA, and I want to welcome you all to the second day of our virtual annual SARCA meeting. I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule today. For some of you, it's a day off if you work for the federal government, being Columbus Day. For those of us that are retired, it's another day that we kind of have to distinguish Monday through Friday with Saturday and Sunday. So really appreciate you taking the time you have available and spending it with us. As Tony mentioned, we had a great day yesterday. Saw a lot of old friends that we hadn't seen before. Unfortunately, we're going through the COVID-19, and we're going to hear a great update from the commander of the 377th and the Army Reserve role in fighting that. But for me, there was some positivity in the fact that we're not able to get together in person, is that we have reconnected virtually and have seen people that we perhaps haven't seen in years. We're visiting with people and exchanging contact information with individuals that we haven't touched base with in quite a while. So as I was telling everybody yesterday, it was kind of like the SARCA meetings that we used to have in about 10 to 12 years ago, when we were all able to gather there in Washington, D.C., less the camaraderie that we would share at the hotel bars and our visits to the embassy. So I really hope you get some great information today. Mr. Austin stood in for the car yesterday, although General Daniels has agreed to speak to SARCA, and she wants to. So we're going to try and negotiate a time that she'll be able to do a Zoom meeting or an MS Team meetings with us. But just a great opportunity to share information, ask your questions. We kind of held them to the end of the speaker's presentation yesterday. And we have a chat room where you can either use the chat room if you feel comfortable, or you can actually turn your mic on and use the microphone as well. So I'm so pleased to see everybody. It demonstrates there's a real interest in what the Army Reserve is doing and what role we play in the national defense. So with that, I want to welcome our first speaker today, the commander of the 377th Theater Support Command, Major General Moser. Thank you, sir, so much for attending and taking time out of your schedule, because I know how busy you are today. Knowing some of the soldiers that you have mobilized there under your command, there is rarely a day off for you and your soldiers. So I really want to thank you for taking time out and giving us a great presentation on what the 377th is doing right now. General Moser comes with some great credentials. He was the Deputy Commanding General for Readiness at the Army Reserve Command. He has spent some time at the 99th RSC, the 88th RSC, the 75th Training Division. So he was going through his Army career, Army Reserve career, has kind of touched base with many of the support commands and the combatant commands that we have in the Army Reserve. So with that, General Moser, I'm not going to take any more of your time, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thanks very much, General Broadway. I really do appreciate the invitation to come today and talk to the Senior Army Reserve Commanders Association about how we're operating in this COVID environment and what the 377th has been in supporting U.S. Army North in this national COVID response. So I'd just like to start things off today with a short video that's going to give you an overview of what the 377th role has been since about late March, early May.
When the coronavirus emerged as a threat to us all, the nation braced for impact as it quickly strengthened to a global pandemic. As the virus took its deadly toll and lives across the country were unrecognizably altered, we as a society came face to face with a new normal. Against this backdrop, the 377th Theater Sustainment Command was called in March to respond to the pandemic and oversee a nationwide logistics effort to support the movement of essential medical personnel and supplies to heavily affected areas. Facing an unprecedented operational environment, the 377th had to adapt on a daily basis to keep the soldiers safe while completing the mission. The command would come to supervise the operations of 3 sustainment commands dedicated expressly for this mission, each of which would eventually supply all regional logistics support for Army North during the fight against the coronavirus. The 13th Expeditionary Sustainment Command assisted with the movement of the 9th Hospital Center from Texas to the Javits Center in New York, as soon as the mission kicked off. Responsible for the center of the country, the Lucky 13th moved over 300 medical personnel across the country while providing line haul movement of goods and contracting support to the heavily hit area. Our partners in the West, the 4th Expeditionary Sustainment Command, oversaw a colossal undertaking in the logistical support of the makeshift field hospital constructed at the CenturyLink Field Events Center in Seattle, Washington. Soldiers of the 4th moved over 125 containers of medical equipment to support the 250-bed field hospital, which operated until the spike in cases in the Pacific Northwest receded. The eastern United States was covered by the 3rd Expeditionary Sustainment Command, which received and processed over 3,200 personnel to the tri-state area to respond to the crisis. The 3rd staged over 115 vehicles and generators, provided 230 containers full of medical equipment for support, and served over 8,400 meals to service members on their way to the front lines against the virus. 377th Headquarters personnel also screened and transported Navy medical personnel to local hospitals in New Orleans and nearby Baton Rouge to support the fight, all while ensuring the subordinate sustainment commands spread across the country succeeded at their essential missions. There is no way to tell what lies ahead, or what dangers still linger as we begin to heal from the damage of the pandemic. Whatever may come, and whatever mission the soldiers of the 377th are called to take on, we will respond to that call as we always have. Can do. Anytime, anywhere.
So as you can see, the 377th Theater Sustainment Command, we were a major part of one of the most historic missions in the history of the Army Reserve. And in order to accomplish this, we had to be at the forefront of mission adaptability. And in retrospect, I can say that's exactly what we did. What we learned from this mobilization was just how important it was for us as a command to be ready to go at a moment's notice, even without your traditional threat staring you in the face. If we hadn't been prepared from a medical readiness and a training readiness standpoint when we got the call for our soldiers to respond, all of those things that you saw in that video wouldn't have gotten off the ground. I think that one of the things about Army North missions, as I look at that mission set, is what we experienced is not that atypical. In other words, I think when we support Army North for either a Homeland Defense or a DISCA support role, calling our headquarters up for a mobilization will almost always be on either a short notice or a no notice event. So like we did back in March and April, we have to be prepared to use our annual training funding like we did back then to put soldiers in position in anticipation of an upcoming mobilization orders. We had about 3 weeks the RFF until we had a mob order in hand. And then it took us another 4 to 5 weeks to get all 300 plus personnel mobilized and in place. And I think that flash to bang underscored the need for our soldiers to have everything in place before any notice comes. Our mobilization mission requires us, right, to work seamlessly with Army North. We have to be ingrained in their battle rhythm. We have to understand how they make decisions, their whole processes and procedures. So since that initial mobilization, what we're doing differently going forward is we're maintaining a larger portion of our headquarters, not extravagant, about 10 part of that footprint for the Army North headquarters in order to maintain that readiness and increase our ability to quickly mobilize in the future. So I want to transition to one of the first themes that I want to talk about today, which is how the 377th is working to build trust in its fundamental operations so that soldiers have confidence in resuming collective training. Our experience in operating in a COVID environment, I'd say, has led to some of the best practices that we currently enforce. And it falls into 4 things. 1, we do daily screenings. Number 2, we wear masks. 3, social distancing. And 4th, personal hygiene, just keeping your hands washed, keeping your personal space clean. So we continue to demonstrate that just by the rigid enforcement of those 4 things, that allows us to get a lot of things done safely. Here's a key point. Resuming collective training is imperative to alleviating any readiness losses that we've experienced because of the training exercises that were canceled during this COVID environment. And our experience in doing collective operations safely is a big plus in getting us back to where we need to be. Here's a couple examples. The 4th ESC, which is headquartered here in San Antonio, and they're mobilized along with us in support of U.S. Army North. They've done a series of FTXs over the last few months in which they've gone out to the field, they've set up their drash tents, established communications, put expando vans together, and actually run their CP out of the field. They've been doing their daily updates and the daily battle rhythm with me during those days. So they've proven that they can be expeditionary even in a COVID environment. Now, granted, it doesn't look the same. There aren't as many people packed into the tent. There aren't as many people in the expando van. But they're still doing the running estimates. They're still compiling the reports. They're still getting in touch with us as their higher headquarters. Another example is the 310th ESC. They're getting ready to deploy overseas. And they recently went to Fort Knox and completed a 2-week pre-deployment training, going through all of the tasks you would imagine with 0 cases of COVID. But they followed those 4 disciplines that I mentioned very diligently. And our mission set isn't just set on doing that COVID-19 response and annual training and battle assemblies. You know, we've even expanded into helping out U.S. Army North with the wildland firefighting that's going on in California. So there's a lot of missions that the 377th will do. And the common underlying thread on all of these is that our soldiers have to take personal responsibility for consistently practicing those mitigation measures. When they do that, it builds confidence in our soldiers that they can train safely, and their families and loved ones also gain the confidence that we're doing everything we can to take care of them. That really dovetails right into the next thing that I wanted to share, which is how the 377th has managed to remain lethal and ready in this COVID environment while maintaining soldier safety. Naturally, military training, right, is close quarters and hands-on. That's the way that a lot of military training has to be. COVID-19 has demanded that we approach that in an entirely different manner. A lot of our soldiers, of course, are TPU. And if we were to assemble them every month or every couple of months like we used to, there's a risk that we're going to bring COVID in from some other part of the country. So it's required us to take precautions in excess of even what the CDC recommendations are. You know, our near-peer adversaries have maintained a status quo for military training throughout this pandemic. Russia conducting large-scale exercises in the Crimea. China has been really training full speed as far back as May. So it's imperative that we keep pace with them on lethality, but we also need to exceed them in terms of the precautions that we take to maintain soldier safety. You can say that ultimately our training has evolved into what could be described as occurring in a contested environment. When we're forward deployed in a combat zone, we still do basic armor warrior skills training. We still do battle drills, marksmanship, and other kinds of training, but it's in a controlled environment. Right? We know that the inherent threat we face by the proximity to our enemy is there, and so we regulate the training. We assess the dangers. And COVID-19 is not that much different. You can look at it as an enemy within our gates, and we've adapted to act accordingly and change the way we go about doing things as a result. One of the first major training events that we did as a Army Reserve was Ready Warrior 20. Now, that was a 15-day event hosted by the 78th Training Division out of McGuire-Dix Lakehurst, but conducted at Fort McCoy, Wisconsin. Now, so to set the stage for what this meant to us, right, ever since March, all of our collective training had come to a halt as a result of COVID. Ready Warrior 20 was a field training event primarily designed for Army Reserve early deploying units. And it covered ACFT familiarization. It covered individual and crew served weapons qualification, land navigation, overall mobilization training. Everything that we did at Ready Warrior 20 was a potential exposure threat to COVID. So we as the 377th provided half of the 32 units from across the country that were convening in Wisconsin for that event. So we had to establish safety measures in an abundance of caution to ensure soldier safety. Over 800 377 soldiers were slated to attend. So this was our first chance to try out the newest safety mitigation measure implemented across the Army Reserve, which is the bubble and fire break system. The bubble concept was a brainchild of Army Reserve headquarters, something they pushed out across the force to emphasize the importance of maintaining the health of the force to our ongoing mission. It had an immediate effect across the entirety of the Army Reserve, and it was instrumental in our success to keep soldiers safe. The thought process behind the training bubble is that if we were able to control and monitor exposure to health risks in an individual and small group basis, or a bubble, as we call it, and we can co-locate those small groups en masse in training environments by restricting their access outside their assigned bubble. Then, if a positive COVID case does occur, it also keeps the contact tracing to that predefined bubble. So what you see here is a representation of a bubble at the brigade level. Within the brigade, of course, you have smaller echelons, and each of those echelons are broken down into smaller bubbles. Each bubble will have, for instance, level 1 PPE when they are with each other, because each person has already been tested, screened, and determined to be COVID-free prior to assembling that bubble. As long as they maintain the distancing and contact restriction from their bubble, they likely won't contract anything because they won't be in close proximity to other groups. To ensure these groups maintain distance, the concept of a fire break was introduced, which prevents any form of direct contact from a member of one bubble and another. These fire breaks are established across any echelon level based on the mission. They're hard and fast restrictions, and they're things we don't allow soldiers to violate without express authorization. So to demonstrate how this works further, here is a battalion bubble with its internal companies. And that will be followed by the company level bubble. And then we'll put in the fire breaks, which again are established based on the needs of the mission and are malleable in that sense. First, the battalion broken in between the companies, the battalion talk and the field trains. And next, the company, split the company platoons, the CP, and the trains. As you can see, it looks a lot like the brigade level, and the system repeats itself from the smallest size organizations to the largest. Finally, there are established fire breaks between each echelon to prevent personnel from interacting in person unnecessarily between echelons. There is an exception to this. There's a designated vector who is an appointed individual essential to mission operations, able to forego the fire break and physically interact with a higher or lower echelon from another bubble. Now, these vectors are held to exceptionally high PPE and cleanliness standards, routine hand washing, mask and glove wearing, and an increased distance maintained for all interactions with outside entities. As you can see here, the vector from the brigade TOC forgoes the fire break, makes contact with a mission essential basis with the assigned vector from the battalion TOC. Whereas most personnel with the brigade can't make physical contact, this individual is enabled to do so to maintain mission effectiveness. The same principle applies between battalion and company level trains elements, where a vector can make contact between them to fulfill mission needs. Now, these are just some examples, but the appointment of a vector is always on a mission essential basis and is established based on the needs of the exercise. The important part of the bubble was making sure that each was COVID-free prior to training beginning. So in most cases, this involved a screening 14 days prior to training, followed by a quarantine for 2 weeks, then telephonic monitoring 3 to 5 days prior to moving to the exercise, and finally, another screening upon arrival at the exercise. So it's complex enough to put together a national training exercise, but in this new environment, we had to think about things in a new way. In the barracks, for instance, we flipped half of the bunks so that in addition to a 6-foot social distance, you had feet to the wall, then head to the wall, feet to the wall, head to the wall, alternating it that way to give even more distance as these bubbles slept in the barracks. Another thing is our op fort, traditionally very up close and hands-on, even to taking prisoners of war. Now the op fort doesn't get within 10 feet. Otherwise that would violate our bubble. The concept of the bubble has universal applications. We've even applied a form of that to our workplace, our headquarters in Belle Chase, and we call it work zones. So we've split our headquarters up into separate buildings and separate work zones so that each person stays within his or her zone and doesn't come across unless specifically authorized to do so. And I'd say that it certainly prevents unauthorized or unnecessary exposure within the office, and certainly kept the instance of COVID transmission well down within our headquarters. I want to talk a little bit now about virtual battle assemblies. So COVID-19 has perhaps affected us the most in how we go about battle assemblies, which we've now been conducting in a virtual capacity. What we wanted to accomplish was to maintain the same kinds of standards for readiness and deployment that we were able to achieve before the pandemic, but without an increased risk to soldiers. Now, to accomplish this, we initiated virtual battle assemblies across the Army Reserve to ensure that our soldiers didn't fall behind in things like medical readiness, records maintenance, and the kinds of briefings that many of us used to know as mandatory training. A lot of briefings. We have cut way back on those, but for those that still do exist in OPSEC and SHARP, we can do those in a virtual battle assembly. So naturally, you can't do everything. You have to still get together to do some kinds of hands-on training. And there were some initial difficulties in establishing connectivity with our personnel that were across the country. We used Microsoft Teams, and once everybody got comfortable with that, we found it was very accessible. Soldiers were very accessible, and maintaining accountability and readiness was not as difficult as we first thought. But getting back to the part where we need to do the hands-on training, in a typical battle assembly, you'll have, of course, reporting to the motor pool at 09 or to the drill hall at 10. In a virtual battle assembly, we still have that same calendar, but we just do the different training sections, and soldiers still have to sign in. Medically speaking, our soldiers are still at the same readiness levels that they always have been. Now, we did take a bit of a dip initially when everything came to a halt. Our leaders have done a phenomenal job since then of really pushing out medical requirements. Soldiers have been responded well in terms of getting to appointments and maintaining that medical readiness without seeing them in person. But despite the effectiveness of that, my guidance to the force within the 377th has been not to rely solely on virtual battle assemblies. So the medical appointments, the records, maintenance, we can stay green on those, but virtual battle assemblies only take us so far. Marksmanship, Army warrior tasks, collective unit validations, all those things require us to make the transition back to in-person battle assemblies. So even now, we're beginning to do that. It starts primarily with people who are local to our area. Some of them have been coming in for battle assemblies. When they do, the same 4 rigid mitigation measures that I talked about apply. Everybody is screened every morning. You wear a mask. Unless you're alone in an office by yourself, you're wearing a mask. Personal hygiene and social distancing is a must. And as I mentioned before, with the zones that we've established within the office and adhering to those, we've been very successful in keeping our COVID transmission to an extremely low level. So as a result of all these measures, both in training exercises and in daily operations at our headquarters, it's almost a negligible percentage if you were to look at our COVID positive results. We've learned a lot about this COVID, through this COVID response. We've learned a lot about how to respond to it. And we found new and adaptive ways to accomplish the mission without compromising soldier safety. One of the keystones for our success as we look to the future is absolutely increasing soldier confidence that our training and battle assembly environments do present a low risk of exposure. And when we look at what our headquarters and the 4th VSE has done, both of us are directly responsible for daily missions in response to U.S. Army North. And right now, you look at us today, both our organizations, the 377th and the 4th, are sitting at a flat 0 in terms of COVID positive quarantine and isolation. So I feel very confident that the soldiers will buy into what we're doing here. I know they want to get back into the fight, and we're giving them a way to do that. So I'd like to finally talk about multi-domain operations. In a COVID environment or otherwise, the Army Reserve's vision for Waypoint 2028 is to provide trained and equipped units and personnel at the scale and speed required, which supports our transition into this new operational territory. Now, from a sustainment perspective, I see 3 challenges when it comes to MDO. First of all, I think our adversary's ability to engage us from strategic distances is probably going to alter how we do things like RSO&I. I think it's going to cause us to have to expand our sustainment footprint over a larger geographical area. Second, I think that it's going to mean that we have to be even better and more familiar with sustaining joint forces. We do some now, but MDO is inherently joint. And I think we're going to need to be more familiar and better, more comfortable with sustaining the joint force. I also think that sustainment operations are probably going to be done in a more contested environment than anybody who's currently serving has known. And probably with limited communications capability or degraded communications. So what do we do to change what we're doing? I think it starts with how we train. Our scenario-based training has to focus and challenge us on those areas that I talked about. I think we have to train as a joint force. We have to focus on interoperability. And we, especially at the TSC level, we have to maintain relationships with strategic partners like DLA and Transcom and Army Materiel Command well in advance of any crisis or conflict. And to combat the limited or degraded communications, I think it's even more important now that we have a generation of leaders, our subordinate leaders, who are confident enough to continue missions in the absence of direct oversight. When it comes to technology in MDO, I think we need to understand how emerging technologies are going to change what and how we sustain in the future. Right now, we're focused on being able to push class 3 and class 5, right? Fuel and ammunition in heavy quantities, great distances, very quickly. But in the future, I think MDO and the technological advances are going to bring us new challenges like where and how we generate power. How do we produce water? I think both of those things are going to change. Autonomous resupply, that's going to be a game changer, as well as the new common tactical truck. So the future has already begun for MDO, and our recent partnership with the Air Force, which culminated in a long-term agreement for a joint enterprise that will further develop technological advancements in artificial intelligence, software, and autonomous systems, is an example. This agreement also includes the new CJADC2, the Combined Joint All-Domain Command and Control, which will integrate the increased technology and is designed to reduce sensor-to-shooter time from what is now roughly, say, 20 minutes to something like 20 seconds. The challenges we face in technological integration within the sustainment community aren't unprecedented, though. In 2016, you remember, we progressed from traditional systems like PBUs and SAMS-E to GCSS Army. That naturally had its ups and downs, but within a relatively short time, we were able to transition to this new and more advanced tracking system. And I expect as we integrate emerging technologies that can help with precision sustainment across geographic areas, we'll see similar kinds of adaptations. Having said this, in the end, it boils down to looking ahead at the mission horizon and continue as if the unfavorable conditions of the pandemic within which we have adapted to operate will persist. COVID-19 is as multifaceted an adversary that assumes the roles of both a direct biological threat to our force at a large and enduring collection, and that it affects all the training that we do. We have to remember that whatever debilitating effects it has had on the reserve's ability to accomplish the mission, it has had the same effect on our adversaries. And as long as we pursue our commitment to individual soldier and unit readiness, while maintaining the best distancing and safety practices, we will continue to execute our sustainment missions at the highest level. So I thank you for your time.
Thanks, General Moser. That was a great update. Those of us who have been around the Army Reserve for quite a while and remember the 377th from 15 to 20 years ago, it looks nothing like it did back then. Great job on what you're doing. Really appreciate the update on the 377th Sustainment Command. And we do have some questions. I've got them in the chat room. I'm not sure if you can see them from your computer. If you can, if you cannot, I'll read them to you. Would that be okay?
Yes, that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. There's the question on drill travel pay. It was introduced to allow for reimbursement of travel expenses for soldiers having to travel extensive distances to their units. How has COVID-19 affected the ability of soldiers to transfer to units far from home? Can they still transfer even under current travel restrictions?
Wow, so a great question. Let me take that in pieces. So drill travel pay, that is still out there, is still an entitlement that is important, as is the related entitlement, which is, and I shouldn't call them entitlements because I need to be careful with that, because we do try to be careful that soldiers don't look at it as something that is guaranteed, but we want to provide that benefit, right, while we can. The related benefit is lodging in kind, which pays for a soldier's lodging while they are at the location. So we are still doing both of those things. Clearly, in a reduced case, we're not spending as much money because there aren't as many soldiers traveling, not as many soldiers staying in lodging. But when they do come, right, then yes, that is still there. It has not prevented the ability for soldiers to transfer from one unit to another. As you know, that is it's really just a paper transfer when we transfer somebody from one UMR to another. But there are no restrictions say that, well, during COVID you're not allowed to transfer between units. We still operate in many ways in a form similar to what I'm sure many of you are familiar with. When we are going to send a unit out the door, we're going to mobilize them and send them across the ocean to a combat area. We still have to do a lot of aggregation, pulling in folks from other units to be able to fill up the deploying unit. That still is the case. We still do that. We did it with the 310th. I mentioned them getting ready for deployment. And so we spent a fair amount of time making sure that they were at 100+% deployability before they started going to the MOB station. So we recognize that the drill travel pay is still important for soldiers. We're still a national component, so we still draw people from all across the country, and being able to offset their travel costs, right, is an important component of being able to keep them in our units.
Thank you. I mean, I'm not sure many people realize how large the 377th Theater Sustainment Command is, and your span of command and control: 35,000 soldiers, 800 civilians, 460 units in 35 states. The largest two-star command in the Department of Defense. So kudos to you and your great team. I have another question. This one from General Vassat, who some of you might recognize as having a little tie to the 377th Theater Sustainment Command. How is your team maintaining mission command of your peacetime down trace as you fulfill your mobilization mission?
Well, you know, I need to address a couple things here. First of all, General Vassat, as many of you know, former commander of the 377th, you're giving me credit for what the 377th is doing, which of course, this just builds on what everybody prior to me has done. It's a great honor and a challenge, right, to be in command of the 377th, but thanks to General Vassat and his predecessors and the folks between him and me for keeping this organization where it's at. When it comes to maintaining peacetime command, so the last time before this time that the 377th deployed, if you all remember, was when General Vassat was here, and 377th went to Haiti to respond to the earthquakes. So he and I share a lot of those same challenges. The difference is we just went to San Antonio. He went all the way over to Haiti. So what happens then with the peacetime command? Initially, we created a rear deck, had another two-star come in because what we had to do was mobilize the entire 377th headquarters over the span of a few weeks. What we've done since we have demobilized a large portion of the 377th. Currently, we only have about 50 or so that are still mobilized. And the part of the changes that we have worked out with USARC that helps us in our continuing role with Army North. You remember before I was talking about how we've got a larger full-time footprint, only about right now it consists of those 50. I could see it going down to even 35 or so, which is about 10% of our authorized strength. What we've worked with our USARC is to have a second deputy of the 377th that is focused on the Army North mission all the time. So right now I've got a deputy that is here in San Antonio with me, And the second, the traditional deputy, the original deputy, the 377th, is not on mobilization orders and is really running that rear det. So I've got the headquarters split right now. Those that are mobilized, plus all of the Compo 1, which some of you may not be familiar with that. I've got the 377th has 35 authorizations for Compo 1 or active duty soldiers on our MTO. So those 35 plus the 50 that I currently have mobilized, that really represents the core of the folks that day to day are focused on the Army North mission. And even when those, if we reduce from 50 to 35 on a full-time order, that will leave us about 70 people with that 1 star in charge that really form the basis for Army North support. That's going to put us in a lot better position than we were if we ever have to mobilize again for Army North. It also leaves us in a good position by allowing the remainder of the full-time force, which are civilians and our AGRs, to focus on the Army Reserve mission. And those report to, as I said, the other deputy for the 377th. So I've got those 2 deputies, both mission sets. It allows me to keep a handle on both pieces of those. And depending on the day, one or the other takes more of my time. But as General Vassat and others know, that's just part of the way that this goes. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Greg. Really appreciate it.
It's good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
Does anybody else have any questions? You can ask them just using your microphone, or you can put them in the chat room.
Well, I have one. Rita, it's Walter Hanovich. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Good
Oh,
morning or good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to everybody. General Vassad, how you doing? So I used to command the 78th, so going back to Fort McCoy sounds going back home. How do you handle the transportation issues when we're talking about moving all these personnel around, particularly for these exercises? I kind of heard you explain, you kind of quarantine them and to go through the process there, and then meeting that up with public transportation requirements.
Yeah, so you're talking specifically about moving them with public transportation from their home of record to the training site?
Right.
Yeah, so that does pose a risk, right? Because we are going through public airports. They're on usually flying, right, in public transportation. That is a risk factor that we assume, and it's the way that we look to mitigate that is by ensuring that number one, that we've quarantined them before they start to move, and we really emphasize on them their responsibility, right, while they are traveling to just keep out of risky situations. Now, most people, right, are wearing masks, right, on the plane, in the airports. There's obviously a lot of close quarters there, but we haven't had a large incidence of virus transmission that way. When they do get to the training site, we go through the daily screening, and that's just something, because we know it's always possible. Our goal in doing the daily screening with the temperature and asking the questions is simply to find out and try to catch on the very, very, very front end if somebody is starting to develop some symptoms. So not perfect, but by keeping them in the bubbles, which is the other key thing, when we assemble that bubble, by limiting that group's exposure to just each other, if somebody does come down, then we don't have to quarantine the entire company or the entire battalion, right? We quarantine that bubble because we know that one person came down with it. So far, we've had good success. So that's how we're dealing with it for now. I guess the other way we could deal with it, of course, is to provide our own transportation. However, flying everybody midair would just get way too costly. So that in that risk benefit analysis, we've gone with the risk of using the public flights.
Thank you.
Hey, Greg, this is Louis again. Sorry to bother you, but I know the Army Reserve has transitioned into readiness divisions, from the former RSCs and RCs. What role did they play in your mobilization, during COVID? Thanks.
So I'll tell you, our mobilization was unique in that it was, well, the way I describe it is, I came on a bit early on annual training. I was actually on ADOS orders, and it was so painful. It was painful because every day I could see what was going on around us, and I wanted the whole headquarters to be, okay, we're not ready today, right? We got to get there. We got to get there. It was a big push, and the RDs didn't have a big role in ours, at least during the mobilization, because we were just pedal to the metal on everybody getting in, doing the screening, and getting them up to speed. The way I see this in a more traditional sense now going forward is we would partner with the RDs across our footprint, right? So actually now, effective October 1st, we just did across in USARC, we did a swap of C2 between the 103rd and the 4th. So the 103rd ESC in Des Moines now falls under the 79th, and the 4th ESC now falls under the 377th. And that was done in part because of this relationship between the 4th and the 377th to US Army North. So now the 377th touches all 4 RDs. And I look to use the RDs to help maximize family readiness for deployment, for a lot of the administrative types of things. Any yellow ribbon functions that go on, are at the RDs. The RDs take care of the buildings and grounds, like the ACFT equipment that we have at every center. That's all part of what I partner with the RDs for. So there's a lot that they do just to help keep things at a baseline so that our soldiers can come in and do the training. I see what we went through in March and April as a bit of a unique circumstance, because it was almost like, just a big push to just get there now. And every day that the team wasn't up to full speed, when I could see that there was a need for that, it was tough going through that. So I tell a lot of people, I really don't want to have to go through that again, which is why we've come back to what I referred to earlier, which is keeping a larger footprint on a full-time basis. That just gives us more of a critical mass of people that are really focused day to day on that mobilization mission. And then as we mobilize the rest of the 300 plus headquarters, it just gives us a more robust capacity to be able to do 24-hour ops. Instead of being 1 deep in a particular function, now I'm 2 or 3 deep. That's what that does for us. So the footprint that we've designed is intended to keep us just at a minimal level in all those critical functions. I know I expanded beyond what you asked, but the RDs, they're expanding their staffs, as you know, and many of them are still getting themselves settled into that new role that they play. But I will partner with every one of them. Thanks for the question.
You bet.
Any other questions?
Sir, Kevin Riddler here. Everything we've focused on thus far or spoken about reference COVID has been in conjunction with training, et cetera. Has any direction come down from Mother Army? Balloon goes up and you all are mobilized. How would COVID play in that kind of thing? Thank you.
So I don't have a lot of information on that. Clearly, There's at a time where we would need to mobilize in a large scale for a national response. There's going to be a risk assessment done on everything that we do. So if you think through what I believe you're asking, if somebody came to me and said 377th has got to mobilize XYZ unit somewhere in our subordinate structure and it may be several units in order to respond to a large scale threat. What I would tell, excuse me, what I would tell every one of those commanders is that, okay, you have to go with speed, but speed does not mean that you can put at risk your soldiers. Okay? Those four things that I talked about have to be woven into everything that they do. The worst thing that we could do, in my view, would be for me to tell that company commander to just, hey, just do what you need to do, because they would snap back to what they were trained to do pre-COVID. You just come together, everybody just assumes, hey, I don't have to worry about COVID, and pretty soon I'd have a company that's non-effective because somebody would be infected and it would spread to the whole company. So it has to be that disciplined application. You're going to bring people together. You're going to keep them socially distanced, even when they sleep. When they come together, you're going to screen people every day. You're going to have people wearing masks every day. Doing collective training, you are going to be apart, right? And you're going to practice physical hygiene, personal hygiene. You have to do those things. So far, the 310th is the example that I would hold up to you. That was that's about 250 people that they had at Fort Knox, and 250 people going through individual weapons training, Army warrior tasks and battle drills, all the collective things, the staff exercises that they had to do. They've had 0 COVID cases. So I think it's possible. It just takes a different mindset, and it's in our leaders, our commanders, and I would say particularly our NCOs, because the NCOs are the ones that are really, they're in touch with the soldiers at the individual level. They have to have in their heads that these are their non-negotiable factors, those 4 things that we need to do. And if we do that, I think we'd be able to get after a mobilization and a quick deployment. But I think for the time being, those mitigation measures are going to be part of everything that we do. Thanks for the question.
We've got time for one more question, and then I get the option to ask the very last one. Does anybody else have another question? Okay, my turn. General Mosier, I'm the chair for the state of Florida in ESGR. And I was wondering, as these soldiers mobilized, for a domestic mission and not a deployment overseas, if you've encountered any soldiers who are having challenges with their employers, or if their employers were fully supportive given the environment that we're in right now, if you can just kind of give me a little perspective on what you've seen as you've gone through this the last several months.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So we did not have any significant pushback on our soldiers. I think that I really recognized that this was something unique. This was something different. And that worked in our favor to the extent, or to the point that you're talking about. The employers realize that, hey, look, we're not sure how to deal with this. So the fact that that's one of their employees, one of our soldiers, is getting mobilized to try to fight this COVID was something that we found a lot of support for. So initially, the mobilization orders that we got ran from middle of May to September 30th. And so everybody was told that they were going to be on orders until the end of September. What happened in reality, though, is we found out that what was going on in New York, because you all remember all the publicity and all the angst that was going on about what was happening in New York. The thought back then was that what was going on in New York and the Javits Center could spread, and it was going to maybe be Philadelphia next, and then DC, and then Atlanta. And if that type of thing would have worked its way across the country, we would have needed everybody that we had on hand. As it turned out, thank goodness, it wasn't like New York all over the place. So we were able to, by late May and the beginning of June, we were able to off-ramp a lot of our soldiers. So I think the fact that we were able to send those soldiers back to their employers as soon as the nation saw that we were coming off of that initial curve, also helped us. We only hung on to them as long as we needed to. So some people did stay on, as you know, through September 30, and we have since gotten that mobilization order extended to the end of March. And there were some people that said, look, I had an agreement, usually just an arrangement with my employer that September 30th, that's it, that's all I can do. And we were able to honor that. If somebody needed to go back September 30, we let them go. We pulled somebody else on. The fact that we've only got 50 mobilized out of 350 in our headquarters gives us the opportunity to do that. So it's worked out well for us. I think the real question would be if we had to do this multiple times, right? If we have another wave and we have to pull them back again, then I think we would really start running into some issues. So we're trying to look at that. We're trying to not go down so far that we would have to bring back the entire headquarters, but it's something that's on our mind. And I want to say thanks to you and the rest of the folks that are in ESGR for the help that you do give us, because I get nothing but positive reports from our soldiers that have had interactions with ESGR about the assistance that you give. So thank you.
You're welcome. There are no final questions. So General Mosher, so appreciative. This is, I mean, the timing of this couldn't have been more informative given the situation that we're in and the audience that you're speaking to. And just a great update and very encouraging that that you're able to answer the call and that we've got young men and women who are ready to be there and doing a really, really important mission. A mission that the Army Reserve is doing that for some of us, I personally don't think the word is getting out. We're hearing about the National Guard and we're hearing about some of the other things that are going on, but we're not hearing about the tremendous Army Reserve footprint that is out there right now. So we intend to help you get that word out. They're not only SARCA members on the call today online, but the Army Reserve ambassadors are on as well. And they are very connected throughout the states and very adept at telling the Army Reserve story. So we're going to use some of your comments, and certainly the video that you provided was very, very educational, and hope you don't mind if we maybe use that in telling the Army Reserve story. So, but thank you so much. Very appreciative. I'm going to pass you a virtual SARCA coin. And that you will be receiving in the mail, and just very appreciative of what you and your staff have done in service to this nation, and for the young men and women and their families and their employers that you support as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. It's really been an honor to address you today. So thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Tony, do you want to take a little bit of a 10-minute break before we introduce our next speaker from the 75th?
I think that'd be great. And, if we take like a 10-minute break or so, and then we'll go to the 75th Army Futures Command and hear from them. Again, like yesterday, feel free to talk amongst yourself while we're on break and connect and all. So, yes, ma'am.
All right. We'll see you back here about 10 after 2. Thank you.